The war room of the Galactic Coalition smelled like fear. Ambassador could sense it even though she was human and supposedly unable to detect the chemical signals that other species released when they were afraid. 17 years of war had taught her to read the room in other ways. The way Admiral's wings hung low instead of standing tall. The way General's water tank bubbled with agitation. The way the delegates had dimmed their crystal bodies to a dull. They were losing, everyone knew it. Sat in the observer's chair at the far end of the massive circular table. Humanity had earned this seat only 6 months ago, after decades of being dismissed as a primitive species barely worth noticing. Humans had discovered faster-than-light travel only 30 years ago. In galactic terms, they were infants. Bobbies who had just learned to crawl while ancient civilizations ran marathons among the stars. The holographic display in the center of the room showed the current state of the war. Red markers represented Empire forces. Blue markers represented Coalition forces. There was far too much red. Admiral stood and addressed the council. She was in species with 4 arms and wings that shimmered like oil on water. Once, those wings had been beautiful. Now they were and torn from too many battles. They have deployed their fleet, she announced. Her voice was steady but could see the slight tremor in her antennae. 12 planet-killing vessels are moving toward our inner defensive line. At current speed, they will reach the system in 6 standard days. Silence filled the room. The system was home to 4 billion civilians. It was also the last major defensive position before the Coalition's core worlds. If fell, everything fell. "What are our options?" asked one of the delegates. His crystalline body pulsed with nervous light. Admiral's wings drooped even lower. "We have exhausted most of our fleet. Our remaining ships are outnumbered 3 to 1. We have requested assistance from neutral powers, but none are willing to challenge the... So we simply wait to die?" General's voice gurgled through his translator, the massive aquatic being pressed against the glass of his mobile tank. 17 years of war, billions dead, and we surrender." "I did not say surrender," Admiral replied. "I said we have exhausted our options. If anyone has a suggestion, I am willing to hear it." More silence. The weight of despair pressed down on everyone in the room. Then slowly, every head turned toward. She had expected this. Humanity was the member of the Coalition. They had been kept far from the actual fighting, deemed too weak and too primitive to contribute meaningfully. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were basic. Their soldiers had never faced real interstellar combat. But desperate people look everywhere for hope, even in places they had previously dismissed. "Ambassador," Admiral said, her compound eyes focusing on with something that might have been embarrassment. "Does humanity have anything to offer? Ships? Weapons, resources? We would accept any assistance at this point." Had been waiting for this question for 6 months. She had prepared for it. Earth's government had prepared for it. They knew this moment would come eventually. She stood slowly, straightening her formal diplomatic uniform. She was 42 years old, with streaks in her black hair and calm eyes that had seen more than most humans her age. Before becoming an ambassador, she had been a military psychologist. She understood what fear did to people. She also understood what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. "Humanity can offer you 1 soldier," she said. The reaction was immediate. Admiral's wings snapped upward in offense. General made a sound that the translator rendered as harsh laughter. The delegates flickered with what looked like anger. "1 soldier," Admiral repeated. "Ambassador, this is not the time for jokes. We are facing extinction. 1 soldier is meaningless." "Perhaps," said calmly. "Or perhaps you do not understand what a human soldier is capable of." "We have studied your species," General said dismissively. "You are slow. You are weak. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. Your soldiers rely entirely on primitive projectile weapons. 1 human against them would last approximately 4 seconds." Smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that made Admiral's wings pull back instinctively. "You have studied human biology," agreed. "But you have not studied human history. You have not seen what we do to each other when we are desperate. You have not witnessed what happens when a human stops trying to survive and starts trying to win." She pulled out a small data device and placed it on the table. A holographic file appeared above it, showing the image of a man. He was Korean in his mid-30s with a face that looked ordinary in every way, short black hair. Brown eyes, a small scar above his left eyebrow. He could have been anyone. "This is Sergeant First Class Park," said. "He is a veteran of Earth's border conflicts. He has volunteered for this mission." Admiral studied the image with obvious confusion. "He looks unremarkable." "He is supposed to," replied. "The most dangerous things in the universe often do." "What exactly do you propose?" General asked. His tone was still dismissive, but noticed he had moved closer to the glass of his tank to get a better look at the file. "Deploy him to the forward command base on 4, said. "The base you have failed to capture despite 14 assault attempts. Drop him alone with no weapons, no support, and no extraction plan. Then watch what happens." "That is suicide," Admiral said. "For most species, yes," agreed. "For a human in the right state of mind, it is something else entirely." The council members exchanged looks. They thought she was crazy. They thought humanity was desperate and delusional. They thought this was a waste of time. But they had no other options. "Very well," Admiral said finally. "We will deploy your soldier. When he dies, at least we will gather intelligence on defensive capabilities." Nodded and sat back down. She did not argue with the Admiral's assumption that would die. There was no point in explaining. They would see for themselves soon enough. She thought about probably sitting in his apartment in Wright now, living a quiet life with his sister. He had asked to be left alone after what happened during the border conflicts. He had wanted peace. But when she had contacted him about this mission, he had agreed without hesitation. Because that was what humans did. They chose peace when they could, and when they could not, they became something else entirely. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth was called a death world. The smell of cooking filled the small apartment inn, stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup while rice steamed in the cooker beside him. Through the window, he could see the city lights stretching toward the ocean, millions of people living their ordinary lives. He had wanted to be one of them. For 3 years, he had tried. His younger sister sat at the kitchen table, studying something on her tablet. She was 28, who worked at the Earth Coalition Research Center. She had moved in with after their parents died, claiming she needed to save money. Knew the real reason. She was watching over him, making sure he stayed stable. The notification sound came from his personal communicator. He ignored it at first, focusing on the soup. Then it came again and again. "Are you going to check that?" asked without looking up. Turned off the stove and picked up the communicator. The message was marked with the highest priority seal of Earth's Galactic Relations Division. He read it twice, then set the device down carefully on the counter. Noticed his stillness. She looked up from her tablet, and her face changed when she saw his expression. "What is it?" she asked. "Deployment orders," said. His voice was flat and calm, the way it always got when he was controlling his emotions. "The Coalition has approved a special mission. They want me." Stood slowly. "They can't. You're retired. You're medically discharged. The incident." "The incident is exactly why they want me," interrupted gently. "They need someone who can do what I did, what I am." He walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were going about their daily lives. Working, eating, loving, fighting, making peace. They had no idea what was happening in the galaxy beyond their world. They did not know that entire species were dying in a war that had lasted longer than most of their lives. And they did not know what humans truly were, what evolution had made them capable of becoming. Joined him at the window. She was shorter than him, with the same black hair and brown eyes they had inherited from their mother. But where his eyes were calm, hers were filled with worry. "The border conflicts almost destroyed you," she said quietly. "After what happened in Vladivostok, you couldn't sleep for a year. You still have nightmares." "I know. And you're going to do this anyway." "I have to." He turned to look at her. "The Coalition is losing. They will win within weeks. And after they finish with the Coalition, they will come for Earth. We're too new, too weak to defend ourselves. If I can end this war before that happens, I have to try." His eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. She was strong like that. "What happens to you after? Even if you survive, what happens to the person you become?" Did not answer because he did not know. He walked to his bedroom and pulled out an old military bag from under his bed. He began packing slowly, taking only personal items. A photograph of his parents. A small jade figure his grandmother had given him as a child. A worn paperback book of Korean poetry that he had carried through every deployment. No weapons, no armor, no technology. He would not need them. appeared in the doorway. "Can you at least explain it to me? What you are, what happens to you? The military reports are classified. Even with my clearance, I can only see fragments." Sat on the edge of his bed, holding the jade figure in his hands. It was a small tiger carved with simple lines. His grandmother had told him that tigers were patient. They waited and watched, and when they struck, nothing could stop them. "Humans evolved on a death world," he began. "You know this. Every other intelligent species in the galaxy came from peaceful planets with stable climates and few predators. They evolved intelligence to cooperate to build societies. We evolved intelligence to survive." "I know the theory," said. "It's not theory, it's biology." He set the tiger down gently. "Every human has a switch inside them, a survival mechanism that activates under extreme threat. Most people never experience it, but soldiers, fighters, people who face death regularly, sometimes we find that switch." "Apex State," said. She had read the classified fragments. "Apex State," confirmed. "When it activates, everything changes. Time perception slows down. Pain becomes just information instead of a warning. The limits that normally protect our bodies from damaging themselves, they disappear. We become what evolution designed us to be when everything else fails." "Predators," whispered. "The ultimate predators," agreed. "Not the fastest, not the strongest, but the most adaptable, the most relentless, the most willing to sacrifice everything to win. Other species have survival instincts that tell them to run when the odds are bad. Humans in Apex State don't have that. We just keep going until we win or we die." Sat down next to him, "And the cost?" "Hi," he looked at his hands. They were steady now, but he remembered when they shook so badly he could not hold a cup. "The body takes weeks to recover, years off you from the stress, and psychologically." He paused. "You have to let go of everything that makes you human to become that thing. Morals, fear, mercy, self-preservation. You have to become a monster, and then you have to find your way back." "Some people don't find their way back." "No, some people don't." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, a transport shuttle crossed the night sky, its lights blinking against the stars. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders. It was also full of war, death, and species who thought they understood violence. They had never met humans. A knock came at the door, opened it to find Colonel standing in the hallway. She was 50 years old, with streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen too much. She had been his commanding officer during the border conflicts. She had seen what he became in Vladivostok. She had also been the one to recommend him for this mission. "The shuttle is waiting," she said. Nodded and picked up his bag. He turned to one last time. "If I don't come back—" "You'll come back," she interrupted firmly. "You always do." He wanted to tell her that this was different, that he was walking into the heart of an enemy empire with no support and no extraction plan, that even for a human in Apex State, the odds were nearly impossible. Instead, he simply hugged her. She held on tight for a long moment, then let go. "Come home," she said. "I'll try." He followed Colonel to the waiting shuttle. The pilot was a young female named with bright wings and curious eyes. She looked at with obvious confusion as he boarded. "Where is your equipment?" she asked. "Your weapons?" "I don't need them," said. His wings fluttered with disbelief, but she said nothing more. She had her orders. As the shuttle lifted off and climbed toward the stars, closed his eyes. He would need to sleep as much as possible during the journey. He would need all his strength for what was coming. Inside him, buried deep beneath years of peace and therapy and careful control, something stirred, something ancient and patient. The Tiger was waking up. The Coalition Command Ship Eternal Chorus was the largest vessel had ever seen. It stretched for nearly 3 kilometers, a massive construction of metal and energy shields that housed over 50,000 crew members from a dozen different species. It had been the pride of the Coalition fleet once. Now it was, and patched, held together by desperate repairs and stubborn hope. Walked through its corridors with at his side. The pilot had been assigned as his guide, though she seemed more confused by this duty than honored. Every few minutes, crew members of various species would stop and stare at him. Word had spread that a single human soldier was being deployed against the— Most looked at him with pity. Some looked at him with contempt. One, an aquatic being in a mobile water suit, deliberately blocked his path. "You are the human," it gurgled, "the one they say will end the war." "I'm a human," replied calmly. "I don't know about ending the war." The made a sound that the translator rendered as bitter laughter. My spawn brother died taking that base on 4. 3,000 coalition soldiers died with him, and you think you alone will succeed where they failed. I don't think anything, said. I'm just following orders. They stared at him for a long moment, then moved aside with a dismissive gesture. Die quickly, human, at least then you will not waste our time. Continued walking without responding. He understood their anger and disbelief. He would have felt the same in their position. How could one soft, slow, weaponless creature succeed where armies had failed? They did not know. They could not know until they saw. The briefing room was filled with high-ranking officers from all coalition species. Admiral was there, along with General in his massive water tank. Commanders glowed with nervous energy. A few other species that did not recognize lined the walls, watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. General activated the holographic display, showing a detailed map of the forward command base. The target is located on the 4th moon of a gas giant in the outer reach sector, the General explained. The base houses approximately 3,000 soldiers, including their elite units. It serves as the coordination center for the fleet. If this base falls, the fleet will be forced to delay their attack while establishing new command protocols. How long of a delay? Asked. Estimates suggest 2 to 3 months, Admiral answered. Enough time for us to reinforce our defensive lines and potentially negotiate with neutral powers. Studied the holographic map carefully. The base was well designed, with multiple defensive layers, heavy weapons emplacements, and a layout that would funnel any attackers into killing zones. The 14 previous coalition assaults had been slaughtered in exactly those zones. I need to be dropped in the center, he said. Admiral's wings twitched. The center, that is deep within enemy territory, you would be surrounded immediately. That's the point, said. If I start from the outside, they can organize a response. If I'm already inside, they'll have to react to me instead. General made a bubbling sound that might have been disbelief. You speak as if you expect to survive the initial contact. I don't expect anything, replied. I'm just telling you what I need. The officers exchanged looks. Finally, Admiral nodded. Very well, we will modify the drop pod trajectory. Is there anything else you require? Weapons, armor, communication equipment? No. Nothing at all. Nothing. More confused looks. Admiral shook her head slowly. Human, I do not understand your strategy. Without weapons, how do you intend to fight? Met her compound eyes steadily. With everything I have. Before the drop, he was required to visit the medical bay for a final health scan. The chief medical officer was a young named. Unlike most of their species who used designation numbers, had chosen a human name after becoming fascinated with Earth culture during their medical studies. Please stand still, said, their crystalline body pulsing with soft blue light as scanning beams passed over. This will only take a moment. Stood patiently while they worked. The medical bay was quiet except for the hum of equipment and the occasional beep of monitors. Interesting, murmured. What is? Your biochemistry. The light shifted to purple, indicating deep thought. I have studied human biology extensively, but your readings are unusual even for your species. Your adrenal system is highly developed, unusually high capacity for stress hormones, and your neural pathways show patterns I associate with trauma survivors. I've seen some things, said simply. More than that, moved closer, their crystalline face forming what might have been concern. Your body is like a weapon that has been loaded but not fired. All this potential energy held in check by conscious control. What happens when you release it? Smiled slightly. It was not a comforting smile. You'll be watching the mission feed, you'll see. I am not sure I want to, admitted. I became a healer because I dislike violence. The idea of watching someone die, even a willing volunteer, disturbs me. Then don't watch, suggested, but I appreciate your concern. He left the medical bay and made his way to the drop pod hangar. The pod itself was small, barely large enough for one person, designed to penetrate planetary defenses through speed and a minimal sensor profile. It had been used for commando insertions before, though usually with teams of heavily armed soldiers. Was waiting for him by the pod. Her wings were folded tight against her back, a sign of anxiety. I have been ordered to say goodbye, she said awkwardly, and to wish you luck. Thank you. I do not understand why you are doing this, she continued. You could have said no. You could have stayed on your safe planet with your family. Why volunteer to die? Climbed into the pod and settled into the cramped seat. Through the small window, he could see the stars and, in the distance, the pale sphere of Four's moon. Because if I don't, he said, many more will die, your people, mine, everyone. But why you? Why must it be you? Because I can do what needs to be done. He began strapping himself in, and because someone has to. The pod's hatch began to close. Stepped back, her wings spreading slightly in what might have been a farewell gesture. Good luck, human. The hatch sealed, was alone in the darkness, lit only by the soft glow of instrument panels. He closed his eyes and began to breathe slowly, deeply. His heart rate dropped, his muscles relaxed. But deeper inside, something else was happening. The walls he had built over 3 years of peace, the barriers that kept the monster contained, he began to lower them one by one. The pod launched with a violent jolt, pressing him back into his seat. Through the window, he watched the eternal chorus shrink away as he hurtled toward the moon below. 3,000 enemy soldiers waited for him down there. Elite warriors of a species that had conquered dozens of worlds. They had weapons, armor, numbers, and the advantage of defense. Had nothing but himself. He smiled in the darkness. It would be enough. As the pod entered the moon's thin atmosphere, flames licking at its heat shields, let go of his last remaining control. And the tiger inside him opened its eyes. The drop pod crashed through the roof of the central command building with the force of a meteor. Metal screamed and tore. Alarms began howling across the entire base. Emergency lights flashed red, casting everything in the color of blood. In the observation room of the Eternal Chorus, dozens of officers watched through remote cameras that had been deployed along with the pod. Admiral stood at the front, her wings completely still. General pressed against the glass of his tank. Even had come, despite their discomfort, with violence. The pod's hatch blew open. What stepped out was not the calm, quiet man who had boarded. The cameras showed moving through the smoke and debris with a fluidity that seemed impossible for a human body. His eyes were different now, empty and focused at the same time, like a predator that had locked onto prey. His face showed no expression, no fear, no hesitation. The first soldiers arrived within seconds. They were tall, powerful beings with 4 arms and thick skin that served as natural armor. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy as they pointed them at the intruder. Surrender, their commander shouted through a translator. You are surrounded. Did not stop walking. The first soldier fired. The energy bolt should have vaporized the human instantly. Instead, was simply not there when it hit. He had moved at the exact moment of firing, sliding sideways with a speed that made Admiral's wings snap back in shock. Then he was among them. What happened next would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for centuries. It would be shown to soldiers as a warning about underestimating humanity. It would give nightmares to veterans for the rest of their lives. Did not fight like the coalition species, who stood at range and exchanged fire according to tactical doctrine. He did not fight like the who used their superior size and strength to overpower enemies. He fought like something from a forgotten age, when survival meant closing with prey and never letting go. He took the first soldier's weapon before they even realized he had moved. In the same motion, he broke the soldier's lower arms with 2 precise strikes and used the body as a shield against incoming fire. The weapon was unfamiliar to him, designed for hands, but he figured out its operation in less than a second and began firing. But the weapon was secondary, he was the weapon. When the energy cell depleted, he threw the gun into a soldier's face and used the distraction to close the distance. His hands found weak points in anatomy that the coalition had never mapped. His movements predicted enemy actions before they happened. Every step was perfect, every strike exactly where it needed to be. There were elite soldiers. They had trained for years. They had fought across 100 worlds and killed thousands of enemies. They had never lost a battle on their own ground. They had never faced a human in apex state. In the observation room, Admiral's translator crackled with words she had never spoken before. What is he? On the screen took a direct hit to his left shoulder. The energy bolt burned through flesh and muscle. A normal being would have collapsed from the pain. Didn't even slow down. He simply adjusted his stance to compensate for the damaged arm and continued killing. His pain receptors whispered, their crystal body flickering with disbelief as they monitored vital signs. They're still active. He feels everything. He's just ignoring it. That's impossible, General said. For your species, yes, came a voice from behind them. Ambassador had entered the observation room silently. She stood watching the screens with an expression that mixed pride and sadness. For humans, pain is just information. In apex state, we can choose what information to act on. On the screens had reached the base's armory. The head locked it down, trying to prevent him from accessing heavier weapons. He didn't bother trying to break in. Instead, he ambushed a patrol, took their equipment, and improvised. He turned standard tools into weapons. He used the base's own systems against its defenders, triggering false alarms to split their forces, cutting power to critical sections, creating chaos. The commanders tried to coordinate a response. They had protocols for this kind of infiltration. But their protocols assumed the infiltrator would behave rationally, would seek cover, would try to escape, would prioritize survival. Did none of these things. He walked through their killing zones as if they were hallways. He attacked reinforced positions alone and won. He took wounds that should have killed him 3 times over and kept fighting. He did not retreat, did not hesitate, did not stop. 3 hours into the assault that was deployed. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were the elite of the elite, genetically enhanced warriors who had never known defeat. 50 of them moved through the base in perfect formation, hunting the human intruder. They found him in the communication center, standing among the bodies of the technicians who had tried to call for help. He was covered in blood, some of it his own, most of it not. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. There were burn marks across his chest and legs. One eye was swollen shut. He was smiling. The commander paused. In all his years of warfare, he had never seen an enemy smile like that. It was not the smile of confidence or madness. It was the smile of something that had stopped pretending to be civilized. Human, the commander said through his translator. You have fought well. Surrender now and we will grant you a warrior's death. Tilted his head slightly, as if considering the offer. Then he spoke, his voice rough from hours of combat. You first. The battle between and the 50 lasted 47 minutes. The observation room aboard the Eternal Chorus was completely silent as they watched. No one could speak. No one could look away. At the end, stood alone among the bodies. He had taken 32 additional wounds. His right leg was broken below the knee. Several ribs were cracked. He had lost enough blood that a normal human would have been unconscious. But he was still standing. And the command base was silent. 4 hours after the drop pod crashed through the roof, coalition forces received a transmission from the base. It was simple, broadcast on all frequencies in the military language. The human is still alive. We are all dead. Send no more soldiers. There is no point. The transmission was followed by the base's automated distress signal shutting off, the defensive weapons powering down, the shields dropping. The war's tide had turned in a single day. In the observation room, Admiral's wings were trembling. She turned to Ambassador with eyes that held something new, not just respect, fear. How many humans are there on Earth? She asked. Met her gaze steadily. 8 billion. And they can all do that. Most will never need to, most will never want to. We teach our children to be gentle. We build societies based on cooperation and peace. We create art and music and literature about love, not war. Paused. But yes, every human carries that potential inside them. We are all descended from survivors, and when survival demands it, we remember what we are. General had gone very still in his tank. You have kept this secret for 30 years, since first contact. Why? Because we hoped we would never need to reveal it, said. We wanted to be known as friends and partners, not as monsters. She looked at the screen where it finally collapsed against a wall, still breathing, still conscious, still watching for threats. Now you know what we are. I hope you can still see us as allies. Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Then she gave a gesture that's translator identified as deep respect. Send recovery teams to the surface, the Admiral ordered. Priority medical evacuation for the human soldier. She turned back to the screens. And someone contact the Empire. Tell them we are ready to discuss terms. The war was not over yet, but everyone in that room knew it soon would be. The Empire requested a ceasefire within 6 hours of losing the 4 command base. Their intelligence networks had already analyzed every second of footage from the battle. They had run simulations, consulted their best strategists, and reached a conclusion that terrified them. If humanity had more soldiers like Park, and Earth had 8 billion humans, the war could not be won. The ceasefire negotiations happened aboard a neutral station in the Outer Reach. Ambassador represented humanity, standing beside Admiral and General as equals for the first time. The delegation entered the chamber with visible hesitation, their eyes scanning constantly as if expecting a human to appear from the shadows. The High Commander was an ancient being, his skin marked with scars from a century of warfare. He had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions and never once shown fear. He showed fear now. "We have studied the recordings," he said through his translator. "We do not understand what we witnessed. Our scientists say it should be impossible. Our soldiers say it was a demon." "It was a human," replied calmly. "Just a human. One human destroyed 3,000 of our best warriors, one human alone with no weapons of his own." The High Commander's forearms twitched with agitation. "What happens if Earth sends 10 humans, 100, 1,000? Did not answer, she did not need to. The implication was clear. The Treaty of was signed 18 hours after the ceasefire request. The terms were favorable to the coalition in ways that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. Territorial concessions, reparations, prisoner exchanges, guarantees of non-aggression. But the most important clause was the one that concerned humanity directly. Earth was granted full membership in the Galactic Coalition, not as observers, not as junior partners, but as equals. Military alliances were offered. Defensive pacts were proposed. Trade agreements that would have taken decades to negotiate were approved in hours. Every species in the galaxy wanted humanity as a friend, because none of them wanted humanity as an enemy. While the diplomats signed documents and made speeches, lay in the medical bay of the Eternal Chorus. He had been unconscious for 3 days while the doctors repaired his body. 47 distinct injuries, 2 organs that had to be regenerated, bone grafts, skin grafts, and enough blood transfusions to replace his entire supply twice over. When he finally woke, was there. "You should not be alive," they said. Their crystal body glowed with soft concern. "By every medical standard I know, you should have died at least 4 times during that assault." Turned his head slowly. Everything hurt. Even breathing felt like effort. Humans are stubborn. "That is an understatement." Moved closer, checking the monitors that tracked recovery. "I have been studying your species since you arrived. I thought I understood human biology. I was wrong. Most people are. Your body is already healing faster than my projections estimated. Your cells seem to recover more efficiently under stress, as if being damaged makes you stronger." Paused. "Is this also part of being human?" "We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day," said. "The ones who couldn't get back up after being knocked down didn't survive long enough to have children." Was quiet for a moment. Then they asked the question that everyone wanted to ask but few had the courage to voice. "What was it like being that thing we watched on the screens?" Closed his eyes. He had known this question would come. He had answered it before, after Vladivostok, to the military psychologists who tried to understand what happened to soldiers who entered apex state. "It's like drowning," he said slowly. "You sink below the surface of yourself. Everything that makes you who you are, your memories, your feelings, your morals, they're still there, but you can't reach them. You're watching from somewhere deep inside while something else takes control." Something else? The survivor, the thing that evolution built to keep us alive when nothing else works. It doesn't think about right or wrong. It doesn't feel fear or mercy. It just does whatever is necessary to win. And when it's over, when you come back to the surface. Opened his eyes and looked at his hands. They were bandaged and still healing from the battle. These hands had killed hundreds of soldiers. He remembered every single one. "You carry the weight," he said. "Every life you took, every choice the survivor made, you remember it all even though you weren't really the one doing it, and you have to find a way to live with that." His crystal body dimmed with sadness. "That sounds terrible." "It is," managed a small, tired smile. "That's why most humans spend their whole lives making sure they never have to do it. We build societies where the survivor isn't needed. We teach our children to be kind instead of deadly. We create art and music and love because those things matter more to us than winning. But you still have the capacity for what you did. Yes, we always will. That's the burden of being human. A week later was well enough to travel. Ambassador arranged for a coalition transport to take him back to Earth. Before he left, Admiral came to see him. She stood awkwardly in the doorway of his medical room, her wings folded tight against her back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. "When you first arrived, I thought you were a joke, a gesture of desperation from a primitive species. I was wrong." "You had no way of knowing," said. "Perhaps, but I should have been more open-minded." Her compound eyes studied him carefully. "I have fought in this war for 17 years. I have seen bravery and cowardice, genius and stupidity, but I have never seen anything like what you did. I hope you never see it again." Admiral tilted her head, confused. "Why, your abilities could end wars, could save millions of lives." "At what cost?" Sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Every time a human enters apex state, they lose a piece of themselves. The mental damage takes years to heal if it heals at all. The physical damage shortens our lives, and the memories—" He shook his head. "Some soldiers never come back from it. They stay in the survivor state forever, unable to reconnect with their humanity." "I did not know." "Most species don't. They see the power and they want it. They don't see the price." Looked out the window at the stars. "Humans could conquer the galaxy if we wanted. We could become the deadliest force the universe has ever seen. But we choose not to, because being human means more than just surviving. It means choosing who we want to be." Admiral was silent for a long time. Then she gave the deepest gesture of respect her species had. "I understand now why your ambassador spoke of hoping you could still be seen as allies," she said. "You were not asking for acceptance. You were offering us a choice." "Yes. Then I choose to see you as friends." Her wings spread slightly in what's translator identified as warmth. "May we never need to see the other side of humanity again." The transport landed in on a rainy morning. Was waiting at the spaceport, standing under an umbrella with red-rimmed eyes that said she had not slept much during the past 2 weeks. When walked down the ramp, moving slowly and carefully on his still-healing leg, she ran to him and threw her arms around him. She held on tight, not saying anything, just holding him as if she was afraid he might disappear. "I came back," he said. "You always do," she whispered, "but you look terrible." He laughed, which hurt his ribs, which made him laugh more. "Thanks." They walked together through the spaceport, past crowds of humans going about their daily lives. Workers heading to jobs, families reuniting after trips, children running and playing. None of them knew that the war that had threatened to destroy the galaxy was over. None of them knew that one of their own had ended it. "Preferred it that way." "What will you do now?" asked as they stepped outside into the rain. Tilted his face up to the sky, letting the water wash over him. It was cold and clean and real. It reminded him that he was home, that he was human, that he had found his way back from the dark place inside himself. "I think I'll cook dinner," he said, "and then maybe sleep for a month." Smiled, "That sounds perfect." Above them, the clouds were beginning to break apart, revealing glimpses of blue sky, and beyond that, the stars. Somewhere out there, they were rebuilding. The coalition was celebrating, and every species in the galaxy was telling stories about the single human who had ended a war in a day. But here, on a rainy morning, Park was just a man walking home with his sister, a survivor who had chosen to be something more. The galaxy would remember him as a warrior. He preferred to be remembered as human.